No one in this family would have ever bet a single cent that something like this could happen, not even Olivia herself. But at exactly 4:30 that afternoon, everything changed forever. And if you stay with me until the very end, you'll understand why miracles often appear where you least expect them. So, make sure you subscribe right now and hit the like button, because what you're about to hear could change the way you see life. The mountains of Granada, Spain, the cool mountain air brushed against the whitewashed walls of the houses, carrying with it the smell of pine and damp soil. Alexander Crawford, a 45-year-old business magnate with contracts across Europe and the United States, drove his car down the cobblestone road that led to his estate. He rarely came home at this hour. In fact, over the last few years, the times he had returned before nightfall could be counted on one hand. A crucial meeting in Madrid had been canceled at the last minute, and almost without thinking, he decided he wanted to surprise his daughter. The wrought iron gates, with the family crest carved in the center, opened slowly with a heavy groan. The villa appeared before him like a postcard. White stucco walls, red-tiled roofs, balconies overflowing with bright geraniums. The garden was a flawless masterpiece, hedges trimmed with geometric precision, stone fountains with crystal-clear water, gravel paths leading to different corners of the estate. To anyone else, it was the perfect portrait of wealth and stability. To Alexander, however, it had always been the stage of a wound that never healed. He parked by the main staircase and lingered for a moment, his hands gripping the wheel. He closed his eyes, inhaled deeply, then stepped out. The sound of his shoes echoed against the marble entrance. Or, at least, it should have been silence. But it wasn't. It was laughter. Not just any laughter. It was clean, vibrant, contagious. The kind of laughter that sneaks under your skin and forces you to smile even if you don't know why. Alexander hadn't heard that sound in his house for years. Not since the doctors, with solemn faces and pitying eyes, had told him that Olivia would never be able to walk. Since then, laughter had vanished, replaced by sterile routines and long, empty silences. And now, there it was again. The sound came from the great hall, which he himself had once remodeled into a playroom for his daughter. He set down his briefcase quietly on the side table in the foyer and began walking carefully, making sure his shoes didn't echo too loudly. His heartbeat quickened, as if warning him that he was about to witness something extraordinary. He approached the door, slightly ajar. A warm beam of light spilled across his face, and then he saw it. In the center of the room stood Isabella, the new nanny he had hired barely 2 weeks earlier. She had her arms extended forward, as if waiting to catch something. Or someone. Her lips curved into a radiant smile, one that carried more reassurance than 1,000 words. 2 meters away from her was Olivia, his daughter, 5 years old, with soft chestnut curls falling over her forehead, and her large brown eyes fixed firmly on Isabella. And she was standing. Not held up by anyone, not strapped into her wheelchair, standing. Alexander blinked, half believing it was a cruel trick of the light. But it wasn't. Olivia's tiny hands floated in the air, searching for balance, while her legs, those same legs that every neurologist had declared without effective motor function, trembled as they supported her weight. She took a step. It was small, shaky, as if she feared the ground might disappear beneath her feet. Then came another, firmer, more determined. Each movement defied every diagnosis, every bleak prognosis that had once condemned her to a lifetime of immobility. Olivia's laughter filled the room, blending with Isabella's gentle encouragement. "That's it, sweetheart. Just one more," the nanny urged, her eyes never leaving the girl. Alexander felt the air choke in his lungs. For years, he had listened to technical explanations, medical jargon that all boiled down to the same word: impossible. He had poured fortunes into therapies, machines, experimental treatments abroad. Nothing had worked. But now, right before his eyes, his daughter reached Isabella, threw herself into her arms, and was lifted off the ground in a joyous spin. The laughter that erupted from her was so pure, so free, that Alexander's knees almost buckled beneath him. He leaned his forehead against the doorframe, his hands trembling. In that instant, he knew his life, and Olivia's, was about to change forever. The first time Alexander heard his daughter's name spoken by a doctor, it was in a cold hospital room, heavy with the smell of disinfectant and walls painted in lifeless beige. Olivia had come into the world far too soon, 2.5 months before her due date, in a chaotic emergency delivery that left no time for decisions or farewells. His wife, Eleanor, never survived the complications. That morning, Alexander walked out of the hospital, a widower, holding only the fragile weight of a daughter who barely reached 1.5 kilograms. For weeks, he lived in a fog. The only thing anchoring him to reality was that tiny child hooked up to tubes and monitors, fighting with every breath. The doctors spoke in whispers, as though their words could cut deeper than scalpels. Severe neurological damage, reduced mobility, uncertain prognosis. But one phrase carved itself into Alexander's memory forever, delivered by an older neurologist with an air of finality. She will spend her entire life in a wheelchair. The years that followed were a relentless battle against that prophecy. Alexander, a man who could close multi-million-dollar deals across continents in a matter of days, discovered there was one thing his fortune and influence could not buy: a miracle for his daughter. He carried her to the finest clinics in Europe, then across the Atlantic to specialists in Boston and New York. He traveled to Switzerland to meet with experimental therapists, to Japan to try robotic rehabilitation systems. And each time, he came back carrying the same mixture of exhausted hope and crushing disappointment. At home, the playroom he had designed with love and optimism gradually transformed into something closer to a rehabilitation ward. Colorful rugs gave way to mats and balance bars. Toys were overshadowed by orthotic equipment and therapy chairs. He hired top physiotherapists, nurses with decades of experience, and caregivers trained in complex cases. All of them professional, precise, methodical, but none of them could reach Olivia's spirit. They measured progress in millimeters and seconds. They charted her efforts with clinical detachment, recording resistance to exercise whenever the girl wept from frustration. And Alexander would stand in the hallway, listening to his daughter's cries, feeling each one stab deeper into the emptiness Eleanor had left behind. One moment, above all, haunted him. Olivia was 4 years old. He had come home early one afternoon and found her sitting by the window after another grueling session. She was holding a doll, a gift from some well-meaning therapist, a doll without legs. So she has a friend who looks like her. That was what they had said. Alexander froze in the doorway, rage and grief colliding inside him. That image, his little girl clutching that cruel reminder, became etched into his mind. It was a daily wound, a constant reminder of what he was fighting for. The arrival of Isabella had almost been an accident. He had been expecting another candidate from the agency, a highly recommended specialist, when a last-minute cancellation forced them to send Isabella instead. He barely had time to glance at her resume before the interview. What caught his attention wasn't her credentials, though she had them, but her questions. She asked nothing about technical schedules or rehabilitation equipment. Instead, she wanted to know Olivia's favorite songs, what frightened her, how she reacted when she was anxious. On Isabella's first day, Alexander watched discreetly from a corner. She hadn't brought charts or machines, just a canvas bag filled with colorful balls, ribbons, and a small wooden drum. She didn't ask Olivia to perform stretches or exercises. She played. She let the girl put plastic crowns on her head, braid her hair with absurd ribbons, and sing made-up songs. Within an hour, Olivia was laughing the way she hadn't in years. Over the following 2 weeks, the house itself seemed to breathe again. Gone were the sterile silences and mechanical hum of therapy devices. In their place came music, laughter, and the soft patter of small footsteps trying, failing, and trying again. Isabella managed what no one else had. Olivia wanted to move, not because she was ordered to, because she chose to. She disguised therapy in games. A scarf became a fluttering butterfly to chase. A balloon was the magic key to unlock an imaginary castle, floating just out of reach. A blanket turned into a magic train, heavy with stuffed animals that Olivia had to drag across the carpet. And with each laugh, each game, her muscles grew stronger without her even realizing it. Alexander saw it all, yet he forced himself not to hope too much. Years of disappointments had built a shield around his heart. Still, each night, he checked the security cameras, an old habit he couldn't break. And there she was, after Isabella had gone to bed. Olivia, struggling in the dim glow of the playroom, gripping the edge of furniture, testing her balance, falling and standing again. One afternoon, while Alexander worked in his office, he heard Isabella humming a tune. It was soft, hypnotic. He peeked into the hall. Olivia stood by the wall, following the rhythm with awkward but determined movements. For just a second, she lifted herself free, her legs holding, before collapsing back into her chair. That moment lit a spark in Alexander's chest, a dangerous spark he had trained himself to extinguish. But sparks have a way of becoming fire, and soon, fire would consume the walls of impossibility that had long held his daughter captive. The morning after Alexander witnessed the impossible, he could not think of anything else. His agenda was full: calls with partners in Zurich, a video conference with his board in London, documents awaiting his signature. But none of it mattered. Every time he tried to concentrate, his mind betrayed him, replaying the same image over and over. Olivia taking those fragile, miraculous steps toward Isabella's open arms. He didn't dare speak of it, not to his staff, not to Isabella, not even to Olivia. In the past, every small advance had been swallowed by setbacks, followed by months of struggle. And yet, something was different now. He could feel it in the air of the house itself. Every corridor, every window seemed to hum with new life, as though the walls carried the memory of what had happened. Isabella acted as though nothing extraordinary had taken place. She didn't bring it up at breakfast. She didn't whisper about it to the house staff. She didn't even look to Alexander for recognition. She simply went on with her day. She prepared Olivia's favorite meals, invented new games in the garden, tapped the little drum in rhythm for her adventures. That silence unsettled Alexander almost as much as the miracle itself. Most therapists would have rushed to document the moment, to send videos to colleagues, perhaps even to the press. Isabella treated it like something sacred, something to be guarded from the noise of the outside world. In the days that followed, Alexander began to notice patterns. Isabella's sessions never lasted long, no more than 20 minutes. But in those minutes, Olivia's body was tested in ways she never noticed. Chairs aligned became a secret tunnel she had to navigate. Stacked cushions turned into a mountain of giants. A soft ball thrown into the air became the treasure she had to recover. And always, the play was wrapped in story. Now, we cross the bridge of fairies. Hurry! The dragon is waking up! Don't let the chocolate river sweep us away. Olivia responded with enthusiasm that no doctor had ever achieved. She begged to play again, to repeat the games, to invent new ones. Laughter echoed through the halls again, a sound Alexander had thought he might never hear in this house. Watching from a distance, he felt something stir inside him: gratitude, wonder, but also a gnawing unease. Could something so simple truly succeed, where years of medicine and machines had failed? One afternoon, Alexander finally tried to confront Isabella. He approached while she and Olivia played in the courtyard, but before he could speak, he heard her say, "If you can reach the flower pot, I'll tell you a secret." "What secret?" Olivia asked, wobbling forward. "The secret of how to fly without wings." Olivia giggled, took another step, and stumbled, but she got back up, eyes sparkling with curiosity. Alexander stopped, words caught in his throat. For the first time, he understood. Isabella wasn't commanding his daughter. She was awakening her. Olivia wasn't moving to satisfy doctors. She was moving because she wanted to discover, to play, to live. That night, while sorting through documents in his study, Alexander stumbled upon a notebook lying on the shelf. It was Olivia's. Between childlike drawings of castles and butterflies, he found shaky handwriting. "Today, I took 2 steps by myself. Isabella says my legs are strong. I want to run after the butterflies." The words pierced him. It wasn't just progress, it was hope, the kind he had thought Olivia would never dare to write down. For the first time in years, Alexander felt tears sting his eyes. Isabella hadn't just strengthened his daughter's body, she had planted faith in her soul. Progress continued, unpredictable but undeniable. Some days, Olivia managed to stay upright for more than a minute without support. Other days, she faltered quickly. Yet even on those days, she never stopped smiling. And Alexander, once terrified of hope, began to count her steps like treasures, each one more valuable than gold. Then came the Friday afternoon that marked the true turning point. Alexander was packing for a business trip to Geneva when he overheard Isabella whisper to Olivia, When Daddy comes back, I want you to show him something new." He froze. Show him what? He didn't dare ask. The question clung to him through the entire flight, during sleepless nights in the hotel, and all the way back as he cut his trip short to return early. He wanted to surprise them. He wanted to see with his own eyes what Isabella meant. And when he arrived, he heard the sound again. Laughter, bright and irresistible, spilling through the corridors of the villa. He set down his bag, his heart racing, and walked toward the playroom. The door was ajar. Through the gap, he saw Isabella, arms open wide, her face glowing with encouragement. And there, standing several paces away, was Olivia. Her tiny hands stretched into the air, her eyes locked with determination. She took one step, then another, then another. Each step was a rebellion against the destiny once carved into medical charts. Alexander gripped the doorframe, his chest tight, his throat burning. At last, Olivia reached Isabella and collapsed into her embrace. Her laughter rang out like a bell of triumph. Alexander's heart nearly burst. He had seen enough. He pushed open the door, stepping inside. Isabella turned, startled, and Olivia stretched out her hand toward him. "I did it, Daddy," she whispered. And in that instant, Alexander knew nothing would ever be the same. "Now, let me ask you something. If doctors told you there was no hope, but you saw even the smallest sign that maybe, just maybe, they were wrong, would you cling to that hope, or would you protect yourself by not believing? Tell me in the comments below." That night, Alexander could barely sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Olivia's small feet lifting from the floor, her arms reaching toward Isabella, her body carrying itself forward as though guided by something greater than sheer muscle. It replayed in his mind like a fragment of film on an endless loop, each repetition stirring both awe and disbelief. The house was silent, save for the wind weaving through the olive trees outside. Long before dawn, Alexander slipped from his bed and walked to the kitchen. To his surprise, Isabella was already there, sitting at the wooden table with a steaming cup of tea in her hands. She looked up, unsurprised to see him. "Do you always wake this early?" he asked, his voice hoarse from a night without rest. "This is when the house still breathes calmly," she said with a quiet smile. "It's when I think about new ideas for Olivia." Alexander sat across from her, studying her face. For weeks he had held back his questions, but the dam had finally cracked. "I've hired the best specialists money could buy, renowned doctors, acclaimed therapists. None of them achieved what you've done in less than a month. Who are you, really?" Isabella didn't look away. "I'm more than a nanny, Alexander. Before this, I worked as a researcher at a neurological rehabilitation center in Madrid. My doctorate was in neuroscience, with a focus on neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself." He leaned forward, frowning. "If that's true, then why leave all of that behind?" For the first time, Isabella hesitated. She glanced at the cup between her hands, as though searching for answers in the steam. 5 years ago, my younger brother was in a car accident. He was left paralyzed from the waist down. The doctors said he'd never walk again. I refused to accept that. I developed a method, a blend of play, music, disguised exercise, constant stimulation. Within a year, he was taking steps. Alexander's eyes widened. "But that's incredible. Why haven't I heard of it?" "Because the hospital rejected it," she said bitterly. "They claimed it lacked scientific proof, that I was risking his health. They dismissed every success as coincidence. When I refused to abandon it, they forced me out. Since then, I've worked privately, with families willing to try." "Were they right?" Alexander asked sharply. "Was it dangerous?" Isabella shook her head. "No, it was slow. It demanded patience, faith, and creativity. Things modern medicine doesn't always value. But it was never dangerous. The only risk was believing too little." For a long time, Alexander said nothing. He was a man who lived in a world of contracts, numbers, guarantees. Yet here was someone telling him that the miracle he had witnessed came from trust, from play, from faith itself. He thought of Olivia's laughter, of her scribbled notes about chasing butterflies. And for the first time, he let himself believe. "I want you to stay," he said at last. "Not just until Olivia can walk on her own, until she can run, jump, do anything she wants. Whatever it takes, however long it takes." Isabella's eyes softened. "That's my goal as well." From that day forward, the villa transformed again. The East Wing, once a space for guests, was cleared and converted into a makeshift rehabilitation hall. Wooden floors gleamed under the morning light, mirrors lined the walls, and colorful mats covered the corners. Isabella orchestrated the sessions with endless imagination. A row of chairs became stepping stones across an enchanted river. Stacks of pillows turned into a fortress to climb. Music filled the room daily, guiding Olivia's every move with rhythm and joy. Her progress was astonishing. Soon she could walk across the hall with minimal support. Sometimes she stumbled, but her determination only grew stronger. Alexander watched from the doorway, resisting the urge to rush in each time she fell. He realized that every fall was part of the miracle, and Olivia wasn't alone. Word began to spread, despite Alexander's attempts to keep things private. A friend of one of the household staff came to him one evening, desperate. Her son, 8-year-old Matteo, had been injured in a car crash and left with severe spinal trauma. No treatment had helped. She begged Alexander to let Isabella see him. Isabella hesitated. "If we do this, there will be no turning back. People will start asking questions." Alexander looked at Olivia, laughing in the garden, her legs carrying her further than anyone had believed possible. Then he looked back at Isabella. "If we can help him, then we will. No turning back." Matteo arrived 2 weeks later. He was quiet, withdrawn, tired of treatments that promised everything and delivered nothing. At first he resisted, but Isabella knew how to reach him. She turned his first session into a treasure hunt, hiding balloons around the room for him to chase. His wheelchair became a chariot, his arms the oars of a great ship. Within weeks, tiny sparks of progress appeared, a twitch in his legs, then deliberate effort, then small, shaky attempts to stand. Isabella recorded each advance with care, not to publish, but to track the invisible path of hope. Alexander watched with the same astonishment he had felt with Olivia. He realized it wasn't just rehabilitation. Isabella was giving children back their childhood. Laughter had become medicine, and hope the most powerful prescription. And Alexander knew this was only the beginning. Alexander was not a man who believed in half measures. In business, once he identified potential, he pursued it relentlessly until it became reality. And now, for the first time in years, he had discovered something far more valuable than any contract or investment. A method that was rewriting his daughter's destiny. What began in secret, games disguised as therapy, laughter woven into exercise, was no longer something he could keep confined within the walls of his villa. He felt it deep inside. This had to grow. This had to reach others. The first step was to expand. He dedicated an entire wing of the estate to Isabella's work, transforming it into a light-filled rehabilitation hall. Wooden beams stretched across high ceilings, and enormous windows bathed the room in sunlight. He ordered equipment, not the cold, metallic machines of hospitals, but objects designed for play and creativity. Bright mats, climbing ropes, soft balls, wooden balance beams, mirrors lining the walls. It was a sanctuary disguised as a playground. When Isabella walked through it for the first time, her eyes softened. "It's perfect," she whispered. "Here, children will forget they're fighting a battle. They'll just live." But Alexander's vision stretched further. He wanted the method documented, structured, turned into a protocol that could be repeated. Isabella resisted at first. She had seen what happened when rigid systems tried to swallow her ideas. But when Alexander explained that it wasn't about control, it was about protecting it from being erased, she agreed. Together, they began writing. Detailed notes on every exercise, every game, every subtle technique hidden beneath laughter. The second child they welcomed was Matteo, but he wouldn't be the last. Word spread quickly, like fire carried by whispers. Parents arrived at the gates, some with cautious hope, others with desperation etched into their faces. They had heard rumors. The millionaire's daughter, once bound to a wheelchair, was walking, even running. And it wasn't doctors or machines. It was something else. For weeks, Alexander turned them away, insisting the method wasn't ready. But Isabella, seeing the faces of those families, finally said, "We can't hide forever. If we're able to help, we have a duty." Together they agreed to begin with only a handful of children. They kept the work private, away from cameras, away from curious eyes. Each child arrived carrying years of frustration. And yet within weeks, sparks appeared. Subtle movements, newfound strength, fragile but undeniable. And then came the first real sign of outside attention. One evening, as Alexander reviewed contracts in his office, his assistant burst in with a copy of the local newspaper. On the front page, the mysterious recovery of the Crawford heiress. The article was vague but suggestive. It described Olivia's sudden progress, spoke of a revolutionary method, and hinted that other children were being treated at the villa. Isabella's name was not mentioned, but the implication was clear. Something extraordinary was happening behind those gates. The phone began ringing. First acquaintances, then journalists, then complete strangers. Some begged for details. Others offered money. A few accused him of staging a hoax. Isabella was firm. If we expose ourselves too soon, they will crush us. The medical establishment will label this pseudoscience. Pharmaceutical companies will call it dangerous. Skeptics will tear it apart. We're not ready. Alexander knew she was right. He had seen it in his world too many times. Anything you couldn't control, you destroyed. But keeping the secret became harder with each passing day. Olivia was no longer just walking. She was running short distances, her laughter echoing across the gardens. Matteo, once confined to a chair, was taking steps with support. These were not miracles that could remain hidden forever. Then came the first official blow. A group of neurologists, all highly respected, published a statement condemning what they called reckless pseudoscientific methods. Though they didn't name Isabella or Alexander directly, the timing and language left little doubt. They warned families against false hope, claiming such practices exploited desperation. Alexander read the statement aloud in the kitchen one night. Isabella listened silently, her face calm, almost resigned. "This was inevitable," she said finally. "They always react the same way. If they can't own it, they'll try to bury it." Alexander clenched his fists. "Then let them try. I've spent my life fighting battles in boardrooms. This time, the stakes are higher, and I don't intend to lose." From that moment, they prepared for war. Isabella continued her quiet work with the children, documenting every step with meticulous care. Videos, measurements, progress logs. Alexander began making plans for something greater. A center dedicated entirely to this method, but already shadows were gathering. Neighbors whispered about the traffic of families arriving at the villa. Anonymous messages began to appear, questioning the legality of what they were doing. And one evening, as Alexander walked Olivia through the garden, he noticed a black car parked at the far end of the road, watching silently before disappearing into the night. The battle had begun, and Alexander knew this was only the first shot. The invitation arrived in the most formal of envelopes, heavy cream paper with a golden crest embossed on the front. It bore the insignia of the International Association for Pediatric Rehabilitation. The message was brief, almost cordial, a request for Alexander and Isabella to attend a private meeting in Madrid to exchange information about the method being used at the Crawford estate. Alexander read it twice, his jaw tightening. He recognized the tone beneath the politeness. This was no invitation, it was a summons. "Do we go?" he asked Isabella, sliding the letter across the table. "We must," she replied without hesitation. "If we refuse, they'll claim we're hiding something. If we go, at least we can look them in the eye." A week later, they entered a luxury hotel in the heart of Madrid. The air inside the conference room was cool, calculated. 3 individuals sat at the table awaiting them. A man in a gray suit with a clipped British accent, a woman with sharp eyes and a stack of folders, and a younger assistant scribbling notes at lightning speed. "Mr. Crawford, Ms. Morales," the woman began, her tone precise. "Thank you for coming." Alexander inclined his head, but said nothing. Isabella answered with a polite, "Good afternoon." The man in the gray suit wasted no time. "We are aware of the reports concerning your daughter and another child under your care. The medical community is intrigued, but we require proof that your methods are not dangerous." Isabella folded her hands calmly. "We have documentation. Weekly progress reports, third-party evaluations, video evidence. Every step is recorded." "That's insufficient," the woman cut in. "We want full access. Our facilities, our specialists, our conditions." Alexander leaned forward, his voice low but firm. "What you want is control, and that won't happen." The room grew tense. The assistant's pen scratched faster. For over an hour, the officials tried persuasion. They offered funding, international recognition, the possibility of global expansion, all in exchange for handing over authority of the program. Each time, Alexander and Isabella refused. Finally, the man in gray sighed. If you insist on continuing alone, understand this. Opposition will be fierce. You will face obstacles you cannot imagine. Isabella's eyes flashed. We've faced impossible odds before. This will not stop us. They left the hotel with the weight of a battle declared. In the car, Alexander broke the silence with a short laugh. They just threatened us. Isabella's lips curved into a thin smile. And threats only come from fear. Back at the estate, life resumed with deceptive normalcy. Olivia and Matteo progressed steadily. Olivia was now running short distances across the playroom, her laughter filling every corner. Matteo could walk 20 steps with light crutches, each one a triumph that drew applause from everyone watching. Families continued to arrive quietly, seeking hope. Isabella welcomed them with the same calm patience, weaving games and stories into exercises that transformed pain into play. But Alexander noticed the shadows lengthening. Building permits for the new center faced sudden delays. Inexplicable inspections arrived unannounced, and rumors spread like poison online. Some called the project a scam, others claimed the Crawfords were exploiting vulnerable families. Then came the first direct warning. One morning, the security team delivered a plain envelope found at the side gate. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Stop now, or you'll regret it. Alexander showed it to Isabella. She didn't even flinch. I expected this, she said. It means we're getting close. Instead of slowing down, Alexander accelerated. He hired additional security, installed new cameras, and commissioned a private investigation into the source of the threats. Meanwhile, he pushed construction of the center forward with double urgency. Weeks later, the day of inauguration arrived. There were no politicians, no press, no spectacle. Only families, parents holding the hands of children who had long been told impossible. The new building glowed with natural light, murals of bright colors covering the walls, laughter echoing as children explored climbing structures, slides, and play areas designed for therapy, disguised as joy. Alexander stood by the entrance, watching Olivia run across the hall with other children. For a moment, he let himself breathe, let himself believe they had won a small victory. But victory carried its own shadow, because by the end of that very day, another envelope appeared, handwritten words scrawled in black ink. You cannot protect them forever. Alexander's jaw clenched. The war wasn't just coming. It was already at his door. The warning note did not break Alexander. It steeled him. For years, he had fought to protect his daughter from despair, from medical predictions that crushed hope before it could grow. Now, he would fight against something far more ruthless. Powerful interests determined to silence them. Security around the estate doubled. Guards patrolled the gates, cameras watched every angle, and a small team traced the origins of the threats. But shadows are hard to track. Whoever was behind the intimidation knew how to stay invisible. Meanwhile, inside the center, life bloomed. The rooms overflowed with color and laughter. Olivia now ran freely across the main hall, her curls bouncing as she raced to catch butterflies that slipped in through the windows. Matteo, once timid and withdrawn, laughed as he balanced across a row of cushions, his crutches discarded for the moment. Other children joined them, each one carrying scars, each one finding strength where none had been expected. Families wept quietly in corners, whispering prayers of gratitude. They had come expecting small miracles, but what they saw were transformations. The impossible was becoming ordinary. But outside those walls, opposition intensified. A respected medical journal published a scathing editorial calling the center a dangerous playground built on pseudoscience. Television pundits mocked Alexander as a desperate billionaire chasing miracles. Hashtags trended online, some ridiculing the Crawfords, others rallying in their defense. The world was beginning to notice, and with attention came both support and venom. One evening, Alexander sat in his study, stacks of documents before him. Permits for the center were suddenly under review. Bank accounts linked to funding the expansion were temporarily frozen by administrative errors. Each obstacle was too precise, too coordinated. They're trying to choke us slowly, Isabella said, setting down a folder. She looked tired but unyielding. First they discredit us, then they bury us in bureaucracy. If that fails, they'll aim directly at us. Alexander met her gaze. Then we don't give them the chance. We move faster. The following week, he invited a small group of parents to record testimonies. Their words were raw, trembling with emotion. One mother spoke of her son standing for the first time in years. Another father described how his daughter now laughed again instead of crying through therapy. These videos were never intended for the public. They were proof, a shield to be used when the storm hit hardest. But the storm came sooner than expected. Late one night, while the children slept, a fire alarm shattered the silence. Smoke curled through the eastern corridor of the villa. Guards raced to extinguish the flames, discovering a small incendiary device planted near a storage room. No one was hurt, but the message was clear. This was no longer about words and warnings. The next morning, police arrived, but their questions felt rehearsed, their interest minimal. Isabella watched them leave, her jaw tight. They won't protect us. We're on our own. Alexander gathered his team in the new center's main hall. Sunlight streamed through the windows, falling on the faces of children who had once been written off as hopeless. "This is bigger than me, bigger than my daughter," he said firmly. "If they silence us, children everywhere lose their chance. That cannot happen. We continue, no matter what it costs." The staff nodded, their loyalty unshaken. Isabella stepped forward, her voice steady. "If they fear us this much, it's because they know we're right. And that means we're closer than ever to changing everything." Still, Alexander couldn't ignore the gnawing weight in his chest. He looked at Olivia that evening, asleep in her bed, her legs curled naturally beneath her, as though walking had always been her destiny. He kissed her forehead and whispered a promise only she could hear. "No one will take this away from you. Not ever." But promises would soon be tested. For the next week, unmarked vehicles lingered near the gates. Anonymous calls reached the estate, silent except for the sound of breathing before the line disconnected. And then, one afternoon, Alexander received an email from an unknown address. Attached was a photograph. It showed Olivia in the garden, running across the grass. The picture had been taken from a distance, clearly without permission. Beneath it, a single line: "You can't guard her forever." Alexander's blood ran cold. The fight was no longer abstract. It had become personal, aimed directly at the one thing he treasured most. And he knew, with absolute certainty, that the final confrontation was approaching. The photograph of Olivia running in the garden never left Alexander's desk. He stared at it for hours, rage and fear intertwining in his chest. Someone had breached the invisible barrier of safety he had built around his daughter. This was no longer about skepticism or professional rivalry. It was about intimidation, about making him bend. But Alexander Crawford did not bend. Within days, he fortified the estate further. Former intelligence officers were added to security. Every entry point was guarded. Every road in and out was monitored. Yet, even as he strengthened the walls, he knew he could not live behind them forever. The project was larger than his gates, larger than his fortune. It was about children everywhere, about rewriting what was possible. The center, despite the threats, flourished. Olivia was now sprinting across the hall, her laughter echoing against murals painted in radiant colors. Mateo walked nearly unaided, determination burning in his eyes. Other children followed, each step a quiet rebellion against the verdicts of medicine. Parents wept openly, not caring if anyone saw. They were witnessing the impossible become real. It was during one of those sessions that Alexander made his decision. He stood at the edge of the room, watching Olivia chase a butterfly that had slipped in through the open window. She caught it, cupped it in her hands, and released it again with a triumphant laugh. At that moment, Alexander realized he could not hide any longer. The world needed to see. He called Isabella to his study that evening. "They will keep coming until we're buried. The only way to fight shadows is with light. We go public, on our terms." Isabella hesitated. She had always feared the spotlight, but she also knew he was right. "Then we must show them everything, not just progress, proof, documentation, families, results." The following month, Alexander organized a private demonstration at the center. No politicians, no journalists, just a handful of doctors and researchers carefully chosen for their integrity, along with the families of the children. Isabella led the session, explaining each game, each disguised exercise, each breakthrough, and then the children themselves showed the truth. Olivia ran, Matteo walked. A girl who had never stood before took 3 trembling steps across the mat, collapsing into her mother's arms. The room fell silent, broken only by the sound of sobbing parents. It was undeniable. Word spread faster than Alexander had anticipated. Videos leaked, testimonies surfaced, stories exploded across the internet. Supporters hailed it as a revolution in rehabilitation. Critics doubled down, calling it dangerous, unverified, unscientific. But no smear could erase the images of children walking, running, laughing. Children who had been told they never would. And with every attack, Alexander responded not with words, but with evidence. Families stood beside him, their voices louder than any editorial. He launched the Olivia Foundation, dedicated to expanding Isabella's method worldwide. The threats did not vanish. Shadows still lingered, resistance still brewed. But Alexander no longer feared them. For every faceless critic, there was a child who took a step. For every letter of intimidation, there was laughter echoing in his halls. One evening, long after the day's work was done, Alexander stood in the new center alone. The walls were quiet, but they carried the memory of joy. He closed his eyes and thought of Eleanor, the wife he had lost, the mother Olivia never knew. "She's walking," he whispered into the silence. "She's free." The next morning, as families poured through the gates and children filled the rooms with life, Alexander knew the battle was not over. But it was one he was willing to fight, for as long as it took. Because miracles, he realized, were not accidents. They were choices. They were battles fought against despair, inch by inch, step by step. And sometimes they began with something as simple as a nanny who believed where others had not. Olivia ran across the courtyard, her voice bright as she called out, "Daddy, watch me!" And Alexander did. With tears in his eyes and pride swelling in his chest, he watched the impossible turn into reality. If you've stayed with me until the end of this story, don't forget to subscribe and leave a like to support these powerful stories. And now, I want to ask you, if you had something in your hands that could change countless lives, but it meant facing enemies who would stop at nothing, would you share it with the world, or would you keep it hidden? Tell me in the comments below.